TW, mentions of abuse growing up. I lived with my emotionally and mentally abusive helicopter mom, misogynistic stepdad, and my brother. When I turned 18, my grandparents was kind enough to let me move in with them since they lived so close to my college. This was my out, away from that clown show at home, and I was incredibly grateful. I sometimes wonder if my parents hadn't been so hard on me if this even would have happened, but I was an adult and I made these decisions. Luckily, I learned from them. Once I was free and had much more freedom, I naturally started to rebel a bit more while I was trying to find my way. I rebelled in everything from clothing, music, tattoos, and dating specifically. I wanted to date the most out there person to prove a point, I guess. If I could go back to my 18-year-old self, I would punch myself in the face for these decisions. I was on a local MySpace forum and saw James. I went to high school with James and we got on fine, but I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. It turns out that James had suffered some childhood trauma and went to go live with a relative about 8 hours away in another state and was seemingly living a more stable life. We started messaging back and forth and I liked James a lot. He was different, quirky, and edgy. I started speak with James more and more frequently and messages became texts and somehow in the mix, it became a relationship that I regret to this day. Every day, non-stop texting and sometimes, it would turn dark and James would say things to me that are forever ingrained in my head. He would often talk about his childhood trauma, he would discuss self-harm and how he enjoyed watching videos of people hurting themselves. Of course, this is a red flag, and I'm unsure why I continued to stick around. After a couple of months, James came to visit me. We stayed a few days in a hotel and it seemed like a whirlwind. I truly cared about him, but looking back, I don't know if I would necessarily call it love or simply just having a good time. But at the time, I was convinced that it was love and that I felt like he was the one for me. There was an instance where I had come out of the bathroom at the hotel and I remember the hotel room being in disarray, clothes strewn everywhere, and it was just a giant mess, but James stood there smiling. He got down on one knee and proposed with a small, sapphire and diamond ring. I said yes, but it just didn't feel real or something about it was unsettling. When I think about it, I feel nauseous. I guess it's a bit of embarrassment that still lingers. Towards the end of James' visit, we sobbed together and was unsure how we were going to make this work. What other options did I have other than to move? I withdrew from my classes and moved to his area. I remember when I told my parents, my mom was extremely upset that I never discussed this with her or my stepdad, and I think that conversation fueled me to really stick it out and make it work. In my mind, I was an adult and this was a huge adult decision and I didn't need to discuss anything with anyone and no one would tell me anything different. We lived in a small room at James' grandmother's house and never really left. He would act very strange when I mentioned wanting friends or wanting to get a job so I could leave the house or even wanting to leave the house in general. I mentioned earlier in the post that James had his quirks and would sometimes do some odd things. For example, he had become a huge insane Clown Posse fan during our relationship. I knew that he liked them, but not to the extent of a borderline obsession. They weren't my cup of tea, but I'm not going to tell someone what they can/can't listen to, but things just got weird. James had become such a fan that he got a giant tattoo that represented his love for the insane Clown Posse. He started to solely listen to their music, and he started to paint his face often in clown makeup. It became so much of an obsession that he would try to force me to paint my face and would get irrationally upset and would scream at me. He shoved me, and tried to trap me in a closet when I told him that I just didn't want to. It was just something that set him off and I'm unsure why. As the days went by, I started to feel more and more isolated to just staying in our room in this house and could only really leave the bedroom to eat or use the bathroom. Otherwise, we just stayed in our room. When I did get to leave the house, James had to be with me and we would just go to his other relative's house or to dinner. I had no friends, wasn't allowed to get a job, had no support system. James kept a notebook that he would journal in and would openly read some of his entries that seemed pretty mild. I shouldn't have invaded his privacy on this particular day, but I think it saved my life. James was getting ready for work and had his notebook on the bed. He had been acting strange/cold towards me, and so I looked in the journal. Some of his entries mentioned how he wanted to cut me on my privates with a box cutter, and he tiptoed around the idea of me not being alive, and this was my out. My parents and I were somewhat speaking at this time, and my aunt lived a couple of hours from me. I had told everyone that I was coming home and what I had just read. My aunt packed up and started heading my way, just in case and to make sure I could safely leave. I told James that I saw what he wrote and that I was going to go back home and that this relationship isn't going to work out. James fell to his knees in tears, begging me not to leave, saying that he loved me, but that all quickly changed into anger, where he wanted to lock me in this closet so I couldn't leave. Lucky for me, he had to go to work before he could really do anything. While he was gone, I packed up my things while listening to his grandma scream at me, and I left. Unfortunately, the story doesn't end here. A few months had gone by and James and I became friends, and I had come to visit him, which was the last visit. Nothing bad happened, it wasn't a bad time or anything, but I just knew that I had to cut him out. Years had gone by after that visit, I would say maybe 3 to 4 years, and I had heard through mutual friends that James had gotten married. I had moved across the country for school and to just explore a new area and have the freedom I should have gotten on the first go without being so crazy. James would occasionally try to speak with me on social media, and I would just not reply, or the replies would be few and far between. I'm 32 now and recently got married. I've started to settle down, and my husband and I are trying for our first baby, which is very exciting. James hasn't been a thought in my mind over the past several years at this point. Until recently. James found me on Facebook, and to be honest, I didn't think he had social media anymore. At this point, I expressed to him that we are not friends and it's really inappropriate to keep messaging me. I said, "Can you please stop?" and he replied, "Nah." Fair enough, so I blocked him. Another few months go by, I get a Snapchat request from him, blocked. Another few months go by and he followed me on Instagram. I kept my Instagram open because I like to post about my travels and fitness stuff, and I really have nothing to hide or anything to really be private about until he started following me. I went to block his account and noticed that this was a brand new account, no followers, and he only followed me. I have since made everything private, blocked all accounts, went to those sites like Been Verified, and had all of my information removed from those databases. I feel like I made a grave mistake as a teenager, and I was able to move on from that and wanting to live a normal life. I'm unsure why he still lurks around trying to antagonize me and be involved in my life. So, James, I have you blocked these days. I hope that's a clear message that I hope we don't meet again.